Hey there, and welcome back to the Parable Podcast. I'm Danielle Zapchenk. Today, we are going to hear from a new friend of mine, Bonnie Weckler, share how she met God and lifelong friends through online video games.
I just had this moment of, I'm going to go, these people I've never met in person, and I'm going to live with them. And the moment I turned into their neighborhood and got to their house and got out of the car, and as he was opening up the garage door, it just felt like coming home. I could just feel God's arms around me. And Gary came out and they just hugged me. We didn't say anything. It was just love and acceptance. And it was just so awesome.
Here's my conversation with Bonnie Weckler on the Parable Podcast. Well, Bonnie, welcome to the Parable Podcast. Like I was just saying as we were praying before the show, I am truly grateful to have gotten to know you the last couple of years. You originally came to our church just at the beginning of COVID. So that's how we originally got connected. But we were in a small group this last year, and just some of your stories were so impactful to me. I mean, I'm still thinking about them, and I know you're going to tell a little bit about them later. And so thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you choosing to share your story.
Well, I think it's important because people need to know that they're not alone and that there are other people out there, and you never know what your story could help someone else through.
Well, before we get into it, just a couple quick questions. I know you love games. What would you say is, I know that's hard to choose, but what is your favorite board game?
Our current favorite board game is it's a card game and a board game, and it's called Sequence. It's basically your normal deck of cards times 2. So there's 2 of every card on the board, and they're in a random order that doesn't really make any sense. But you are dealt 7 cards each. You partner with someone else, usually sit across the board. You can't talk your hand. You can't talk strategy. You just kind of have to play your cards as they go. And if you hope and pray that your partner has cards that are near you. But basically what you want to do is you want to get 5 cards in a row, and that's called a sequence. And you need to get 2 of those to win. But it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. If you could pick out any kind of game that would represent your personality, what do you think that game would be?
Oh, that's a hard one. I don't know. I really, as a kid, I loved Yahtzee. I had crazy good experiences with playing Yahtzee where I could get 4 and 5 Yahtzees in a row. And my brother would be like, how are you doing that? I'm just rolling the dice, and it just happens. So, because my life has been pretty much a roll of the dice and kind of go with it and see where it goes. So
that's great, Bonnie. So you grew up in Georgia. Can you tell us, what was your childhood like? What were you like as a kid?
I was a tomboy, huge tomboy. My hair was super long and always in a mess, and running, jumping, climbing trees. My dad was into black powder rifles, and we would go to rendezvous and stuff. And so I learned how to start a fire with flint and steel and throw a tomahawk and, all those fun things. So we had a lot of fun as kids. I don't have a lot of memories from when I was really young because my dad was very abusive. And so he was an alcoholic, and he was not a very kind alcoholic. So I don't have a lot of memories that I remember from my childhood. There are very few. One memory I do have as a child was asking Jesus into my heart. I was under the age of 8, and I can remember sitting on the church pew and asking Jesus into my heart. And that's all I remember. And I know I was super little, but that's one of my fond memories that I have as a kid.
Oh, that's sweet. Now, what is a rendezvous? What did you mention that just flippantly? And I'm I grew up in Appleton, Wisconsin. So rendezvous is, kind of like a secret thing. So what's that to you?
So it's a traditional Native American rendezvous. So basically what would happen is Native tribes would migrate, and they'd have these different paths. And so certain times of the year, you would have more families come together, and you would have a big camp out that would last for a couple days. You would get together, do a lot of hunting and gathering and stuff like that. And it was a way to see people that you hadn't seen in a while, and you would trade goods and beads and things you'd made and stuff like like that with other people. And so we would do these rendezvous as a kid. And as a kid, we would make like beaded necklaces and stuff like that. And we'd go trade it with other people for like rock candy or, something like that. But the adults, they would have shooting competitions. So they did black powder rifles, and they would have like different competitions. And at the end of like the 2 or 3 days, they would have an award ceremony. And so like whoever had the best shot or the trick shot or whatever else, and they'd give out these awards and stuff. And so, but it was primitive. So like everything had to be done a certain behind a year. So you couldn't have like zippers. So everything, clothing, tents, your things you sleep on. So we slept on pallets with fur and, stuff like that. The tent that we slept in was a waxed canvas tent that my mom made. The poles were out of trees. Our cookware was cast iron. Our silverware was made by my dad's friend who was a blacksmith. His wife, she made cloth on a loom, and so we bought fabric from her. Everybody was kind of interconnected, so everybody had like their niche of what they could do, and you would trade things together to get the pieces you need. So
wow. Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. Like I just imagine you just saying like, oh, this was just a location we were going to wind up and shoot some things, but that's so cool. That's great. Bonnie, the show is about stories, and I truly believe everybody has a story to share. And it's important because I think sometimes we kind of push away our stories because just like, oh, well, I'm not a huge speaker. I'm not a musician. I'm not in the public eye. Like, who needs to know? But I really believe our stories matter, and that like as we grow, we like connect and we get to hear these stories, and that's how we deepen our faith. So, Bonnie, what is one of the stories that you wanted to share today?
So I was going to talk about how I got to where I am. I'm originally from Georgia, and I now live in Gilbert's, Illinois. So, I mean, that's like almost as far away as you can get from Georgia. So my story actually starts around about 2011, 2012. It's kind of like my journey to faith and also how I got here. 2011, 2012, I was living in Savannah, Georgia. My goddaughter, I call her Peanut. Her name is Ashley, but I call her Peanut, came to live with me and my ex-husband. She was 15, and her mom, my cousin, had died when she was 12. And so she did not have a very good life growing up. Her father wasn't in the picture, and, it was kind of hard on her. And at the age of 15, she was staying with my mom in Georgia, in Columbus, Georgia, and asked if she could come live with us. And I, without hesitation, said, sure, you can come and live with us. And it was great. We moved into a house that was owned by some friends of ours. And our deal was that whatever money we were going to spend on rent for the house, we would use to fix the house. So we redid the flooring, we redid the paint, we just up the upkeep on the house, the yard, whatever. If it broke, we fixed it, that kind of thing, because they moved to North Dakota from Savannah, Georgia. So wasn't too bad the first year or so. And I've played video games forever, my gaming headset, but I started playing this game called Rift, and it's an MMO, which is massive multiplayer online role-playing game. And I met some really great people that I still talk to. Carlton and Carrie are like my brother and sister. They have helped me out so much throughout my life, and I met them playing Rift online, and there were weeks that we would talk 5-7 days a week, 2, 3, 4 hours a day. So I got to know them and their kids, and they're really strong believers in Christ. They don't hide the fact that they believe, but from, growing up as a kid, I didn't grow up in the church. My mom was Lutheran, my dad was Baptist. I can count on my hand the number of times I went to church as a child. So I knew of Jesus, and I had a faith as a kid, but I'd had so many interactions where I wasn't sure. It was a lot of people not holding their word and everything else. And so I just kind of pushed it to the side and didn't deal with it at the time. Through Carlton and Carrie, I was able to have those conversations about God and was able to attend church online with them. So I have a history of online online church service.
So, Bonnie, before you continue on, how do you guys like have conversations? And I'm sure it took like, a couple of weeks. It wasn't like immediate. Like, how did you start building that relationship that like they decided to like offer you to come to their church online?
Sometimes God puts people in your life that are meant to be there. And Carlton and Carrie were those kind of people for me. They just immediately opened, because gamers are like a special community. We tend to not meet people in person a lot. So you build those strong bonds just upon your voice and your play ethic. And gaming bonds last for years. I mean, I've known Carlton and Carrie now 10, 11 years. And within the first 2 years or so, I sent them Christmas presents. I love to crochet and craft and make things. So I made hats and stuff for the kids and whatnot. And I mailed it up here to them. And when they opened it, they took pictures and, texted me pictures. They're like, we opened it. They're so awesome. I think they still have some of the hats, though, that they've grown out of them. But so it's just, we would have Carlton and Carrie would not like sugarcoat things. They, if something good happened in the game, they would praise God. And, and it's just one of those things that I felt like because they didn't push God in my direction, that I could ask them those questions that, I had concerns with, and not being able to find a church and stuff like that, and kind of pushing that to the side because I had other things to worry about, and it wasn't that big of a deal to me. But seeing their strong faith let me open up and ask those questions that I had, and was able to watch church service and stuff like that. So, and we had a great friendship, and everybody. So my ex-husband played, my goddaughter played. We turned the dining room into our command center. And our motto was, a family that games together stays together. So, we'd all play together, and it was one of those things that we played together as the three of us, but then we also had this large community of, 15 to 20 people that we played games with 5-7 nights a week. So it was like our extended family. And everything was going fine. And then my ex lost his job. And this had been a job that he'd been at for like 12 and a half years. And he thought of the owner as like his dad. He was one of the only strong role models in his life. And so when Freddie, in his later age, retired and had to close the business, my ex-husband didn't know what to do. He lost his foundation. He got really depressed. He pushed us all away. He started doing things on his own, and it rocked my world. We had some money coming in from his unemployment, and then I was only working at Hancock Fabrics part-time, making under $9 an hour, and we had Peanut, who is now a junior going into senior year of high school, and so we ended up getting on food stamps and assisteds and stuff like that, and he was having a really hard time finding another job, and he had tried a job that he knew he couldn't do, but he wanted to try, and he did it for a day. It did not work, and we lost his benefits because he had gotten a job. And so we lost his benefits, and it was bad. And I was talking to Carlton and Carrie, and I remember one night I had got off of work, and I had called Carlton and Carrie on my way home, and we were talking, and I was just at rock bottom, and I didn't know what I was going to do or what was going to happen. And they just started praying for me, and they're like, you have to give it to God, because we can't do it on our own. We have to ask for his help and his grace to get us through. And I remember sitting in my car, bawling my eyes out, and just praying with him on the phone. And for me, that was my turning point. Like, we were so much trouble and so many hard things, but I had this new faith, and I knew that no matter what happened, that God's got me, and that it's all going to work out one way or another. He has a plan, and as long as I keep doing what I can, he'll do what he needs to do to get me to where I need to be. And so he found a job working for the Georgia Lottery, and was he didn't like it, but he did it because that's what we needed. And I just couldn't find anything else. I don't know what it was about Savannah, Georgia. It was just like all the doors were locked. Every time I tried to find another job, it just, something fell through and it just didn't work. And one night we were, it was before we started gaming for that night, and I was talking to Carlton, and I said, Carlton, I said, is there a Hancock Fabrics near you? And he's like, there's one in Crystal Lake. And I was like, this is a radical idea, but I could transfer jobs from Savannah to Crystal Lake, have my foot in the door there, and find something else better. Because trying to find a job somewhere else, like another state, is really hard. You know, and this is before you do Zoom calls and everything else, because this was, 10 years ago. This was pre-COVID. So, he said, you can come and stay in our basement and while you get your feet on the ground. And I was like, are you sure? And he said, yeah, you can come stay. And I'm like, okay. And so we started planning, and at this time we had only talked through voice chat programs. We're using TeamSpeak as one of the programs, and maybe like Google Hangouts and stuff like that every now and again. But we had never met in person, like ever. And so there was a moment like a couple weeks before I was scheduled to leave that I just had this moment of, I'm going to go to these people I've never met in person, and I'm going to live with them. And it was like, Lord, this is what you want me to do. This is what I'll do. And it was so funny because I told him about it, and he's like, I had that exact same thing. He's like, I'm going to let this woman that I've never met in person come live in my house with my wife and children. And he's like, we gave it to God. And like, if this is what's meant to be, this is where we're supposed to be, then this is what we're going to do. And driving up, my mom drove up with me. I had my Trailblazer with a pull behind U-Haul, and the moment I like turned into their neighborhood and got to their house and got out of the car, and as he was opening up the garage door, it just felt like coming home. I could just feel God's arms around me. And Gary came out, and they just hugged me. And it was just, we didn't say anything. It was just love and acceptance, and it was just so awesome. And it's one of the best decisions I ever made in my life.
Bonnie, that's beautiful, and that's like such a touching moment. I hope that we can replay that when we get to heaven. That's what I imagine heaven to be like. We get to replay those special times over and over. So you were married, and what was your relationship like? Was your husband like, okay, totally, just go to the other side of the country? What happened during that time? Or he was like, okay, we'll just see what happens because we need the money?
I was going to come up first and then kind of get myself situated, and then he followed me up. So I came up end of July, beginning of August, and he came up in September. And I was able to get my foot on the ground, and I was working, and I was doing interviews and stuff to find a better paying job. And he came up and followed me later. My goddaughter stayed in Savannah because she was an adult, and legally I couldn't make her do anything. It was up to her. So he came up, but I mean, we had problems because it was more our relationship, because he is agnostic, and me finding my faith as a Christian and a believer. He had a really hard time trying to figure out how he fit into my life. And I can remember one time I was in the kitchen, we were still in Savannah, and I put my sewing machine stuff in the kitchen table because I love to sew and I didn't have room for it, so it lived on the kitchen table. And I was listening to Air One, which is Christian radio, and he looked at me and he goes, "Are you required to listen to Christian music?" And I said, "No." I said, "But it makes me feel better. It makes me happy." For me, especially, because music has been in my life forever, my mood changes with what I'm listening to, and if I'm listening to positive, upbeat, inspirational music, I'm happier. I'm more positive. I'm more, this is going to be okay no matter what kind of thing. And I tried to explain that to him and he just didn't get it. One of our many arguments was, he says, good people like Gandhi aren't going to go to heaven. And my response was, well, he doesn't believe in heaven, so why would it matter if he can't get into heaven? So we had some interesting discussions, and we ended up, it was more of two people sharing a home and a bed than it was a husband and wife. And eventually, we tried counseling, everything. I even went to a Christian counselor, and it just didn't work. And, you hear people talk about different yokes. As a believer, it's easier to be in a relationship with another believer because you can have those conversations. You can have those prayers together, and when you have trouble, the two of you can come together and pray about it, and it's just so much easier. We stayed together for another 5 years before we got divorced. I felt like I had to do whatever I could to try and make it work, and I changed myself so much. Like, the things that he said bothered him, I completely changed everything. I was not me. I became what I thought he wanted, and it still didn't work for him. And when I made those comments, he's like, well, I didn't even notice. So it was just like a stab to the heart again of like, I did all these things and I've tried all these things, and it's like, you didn't even notice. So yeah, eventually it came down to, it was just, we were sleeping in separate rooms and we were trying to sell our house. And for me, I had my church, and I had Carlton and Carrie and the kids, and I had my church family. And so whenever I was having hard times or troubles or anything like that, I had plenty of people to talk to. And he did not. He was very introverted. He didn't have a lot of friends. All of his family was still in Georgia. And he came to me one night just crying and upset, and I said, go home. He's like, well, what about the house and this and that? I was like, just go. God's got this for me. He will help me out and we'll get through it. And I told him, I was like, just go. I will FedEx you the divorce papers and we will figure it out. But you need your support system, and your support system is in Georgia. So just go. And he left on September 20th, 2019. And I was selling the townhouse and didn't have a big plan of what I was going to do. And when people would ask me, aren't you worried? Aren't you concerned? Like, where are you going to go? Where are you going to live? What are you going to do? And I was not worried. I was not concerned. I had some contingency plans in place, but I would say God's got this. He has a plan for me and it will work out. And a lot of people were like, well, I'm really concerned for you and I'm really worried for you. And I'm like, don't be. I'm not. You shouldn't be either.
Bonnie, what would you say how your faith has grown from the time you stepped into, that embrace from Carlton and Carrie to probably like a year into being in Illinois? What was it like? Because you said like, I just trusted. Was it still scary though? How were you feeling?
In the beginning, like 2013, I call that the year everything changed. 2013 was the year, for me, that was a great year. I found my rock bottom and I found God and got through one of the toughest times in my life. And if you ask my ex about 2013, it's the worst year of his life and he's never gotten over it. So we have completely opposite views of the same situation. To me, I credit it towards my faith in God and his lack of faith. And I still pray for him. I never stop praying that, people will come to their belief in their time if they're meant to be. But for me, it was because I was at my rock bottom and had to do whatever, second jobs or doing without, or, learning how to scrape by on different things. And I was thinking about this the other day. Someone was talking about, like, if there's somewhere where you can rent people, it's like you go to the library and these people have a label of, like, addict, on bond or probation or divorced or whatever, and you can rent them and hear their story. Because this whole theme of stories has been happening for like the last 2 months. It's been so strong. I'm like, okay, I've got to sit down with Danielle and do my story, because God's telling me that I need to tell my story, because I keep hearing about people telling their stories. Anyway, they were like, what would your title be? And for me, the first thought that came to my head is my title would be childhood survivor of domestic abuse, and how that has shaped me to be the person that I am. And so because of what I had to go through as a kid and what I've gone through in my adult life, I feel like I'm a survivor. No matter what happens, no matter what life throws at me, I will survive it and I will come out better in the end. And it's because of my faith in God. It has just gotten so much stronger from where I was as a teenager versus where I'm at now. It's 300-fold of where I was compared to where I am now.
Yeah, Bonnie, I did see that story on social media about the people that you could rent. I think it was in either Denmark or Sweden. I thought that was so beautiful. But when you were just talking about those labels, it's definitely easy for us to put that label on ourselves. And then we set ourselves in the box of like, that's what we just are. But then having that interaction with one person, because you immediately see the one and only label, then we're able to understand what is the bigger picture, because you are obviously more than just a survivor of domestic abuse. You're more than that. God knows that you are more than that. And so I'm glad that you can understand that. And also for those listening, that we're more than just one label. I mean, ultimately, we're children of God, and that's number one, of course. So you said earlier at the beginning, as your childhood, you went through a lot of trauma as a kid, a lot of trauma. So when you were going through that period of 2011 through 2013, did things like when you had to go back on food stamps, did that trigger things of like your childhood?
Oh, yeah. There were times when we were kids where for breakfast, Mom would make homemade eggnog because it had eggs and milk and sugar in it. And those are the things that she had on hand. Sometimes we had cinnamon in it, sometimes we didn't. But that's what we would have for breakfast because that's what we had on hand. And I can remember as a kid, like our breakfast and lunch would come from school. And so, we had assistants when we were little as kids because, so I mentioned that my dad was an alcoholic. I don't know how old we were when this happened because my brain has blocked that out. But I know we were small. Dad had been drinking, come home, and Mom and Dad were in their bedroom arguing. Our home at the time was 14 foot by 16 foot. It was 2 trailer additions pushed together, so it was tiny. We were in the living room watching TV. They were in their bedroom arguing, and then it came out into the living room, and Mom told us to go to our bedroom, so we went to our bedroom, and then the argument came to our bedroom. And I remember I'm the middle child, so I'm the protector, and I was also Daddy's little girl. So I had my older sister under one arm and my younger brother under the other arm, and I'm just kind of rocking them and kind of holding them. And my dad said something about my sister, because my sister's my half sister, she's not my full sister, and Mom said something to him. He went to hit her, she blocked him and pushed him, and they were in the doorway, and he hit his head on the door frame and slumped down. And my mom yelled at us to run next door to my uncle's house, and so we ran next door to my uncle's house, and my mom comes over. We wake up my uncle, and we're kind of in a spare bedroom, and I can hear my dad yelling. He had a glass sliding door, and so my dad is like pounding on this glass sliding door. Just let me in, just let me in. I just want to see my kids, just want to see my kids. And he ends up punching his arm through the glass sliding door and almost cut his arm off. They had to do surgery to repair it, and so because of that, he couldn't work, and it was really hard on Mom. She was working 2 or 3 different jobs, and they were still together. Like, she didn't leave him, because in that time period, she'd already been in one abusive relationship with her first husband and had come down here. She'd had 2 more kids, and in that time period, it was you did whatever you had to make it work. That whole stand by your man thing, I don't agree with it, but I mean, there are certain times and instances where it's better off to separate. And I remember being, as a kid, my mom and dad, they went to counseling. They went to a pastor and talked to a pastor, and they actually had these tapes, Billy Graham tapes. I remember looking at them because they were in this case, and they would sit down and they would listen to it. And so they were trying to make things work. They were trying to go through counseling and trying to figure all of this stuff out. And I remember being, as a little kid, upset with Billy Graham because it didn't work for them.
Oh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's too cute though, as a kid, to say that now. Like, as an adult, I was upset with Billy Graham.
It's one of those weird things, but I still have issues from that time period, because we lived paycheck to paycheck. I remember there was one time period my dad had a pickup truck, and he would sell vegetables and fruits out of the pickup truck. We would load up the truck, and then we would go and park on the side of the road, and we would sell these vegetables to try and make money to be able to pay the bills and be able to buy groceries and stuff like that. And so he did all kinds of things to try and generate money, and Mom was working a couple of different jobs. And as a kid, I didn't realize how poor we were. You don't know what's going on. It wasn't until I was older, a teenager and in my 20s, that I realized how poor we were. Talking to Michael, my fiance, his upbringing and mine are like almost exact opposites. His mom and dad were together until she died. He had a family unit, and he's the oldest of 3, and had good schools and everything else. And like, we talk about things, and he's like, I never thought of it that way. Or he'll say something, I'll be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. So we have some really in-depth conversations. Like, our first week of dating, we'd spend 5 to 6 hours on the phone just talking about everything. But I still have those issues. I found out in my early 20s, when I was in college, that I actually have PTSD from what I grew up with. So if I'm in an environment where someone is yelling and screaming and cussing, even if it's not directed at me, I get that instinct. I call it my instinct to just shrink and make myself as small as possible. I don't make eye contact. I answer in and just small words to try and make myself a small target, so that anger and that rage is not focused at me. But I know what my triggers are. I can kind of control it better now. It gets interesting sometimes.
Bonnie, I'm grateful that you stepped into that a little bit. And I know that is hard to walk back through that, because it's never fun. I mentioned this before on the podcast. My dad, he lived in a domestic abuse situation. There's a lot of abuse and alcoholism that happened as a child. And I understood that happened, but it was almost like I couldn't even understand how someone does that, But the beautiful thing is that my dad was able to restore that relationship, and I have an amazing dad because of it. And so I think the same is for you, is that out of the brokenness, that there is restoration in your story. And so I'm grateful for that for you.
Yeah, my dad died in 2008 from complications with cancer, but the last 10 years of his life, he had found his faith. He always had a little bit of faith, but he found his faith, started attending a church. He still drank occasionally, but nowhere near as bad as he did when we were younger. And I would tell him every time that I could how proud I was of him, that he was so much better of a person than he was when I was younger, and how much I appreciated his turnaround and his faith in God that helped him come to terms with what he did, to himself and to others, and he was a better man. I like to remember my dad as he was in those later years than the way he was when I was a kid, because he did completely change his life around and made amends with what he did. And it turns out that he actually was manic depressive and bipolar, which contributed to a lot of his issues with drinking. So he got treatment for that and some other things. things. And so in his later years, he was a much better man. You know, he was the kind of person who would give you the shirt off his back to help you. You know, if he had $100 in his pocket and you needed it for something, he'd give it to you, and he'd find another way to get money to do what he needed to do. So, but he was a kind man and would help anybody and everybody towards the end. And every time I talked to him, I'd be like, I'm so proud of you.
Yeah, I'm glad you had that reconciliation and that moment with him. So, Bonnie, coming full circle, so we started in 2012. So as we look now, it's 2022. What does your life look like now?
Oh, it has been great. When I first came up here, this is my third church. since 2014, this is my third church. Carlton and Carrie were going to a small church in Crystal Lake that I attended online, and Carrie worked with a program called GEMS, which is Girls Everywhere Meeting Our Savior. And so I was able to help her with that program and mentor young girls and teach them about God and Jesus. And it was a great experience. And we left that church and went to another church in Grays Lake and got rooted in that church and had some really great people and really great community. And we started the GEMS program there as well. They didn't have a program for young girls, and so we got it on the ground and got it going. And it was really good to, again, mentor young girls, and that, you know, they are beautiful, they are loved, they are known, and they are children of God. And it's been a great experience. And after I got divorced, I started using it online as a theme in my life. I met Carlton and Carrie online. I met Michael online. It worked. But so I met him with an app online. And one of my things was, I'm looking for someone who has a strong faith in God. Because for me, that was extremely important, because I had seen what my relationship could be like with someone who didn't have that faith. And so now Michael is a firm believer. We were continue going to my church in Grays Lake, but from where we live, that's like 2 hours round trip. So we were looking for something closer, and that's when we found Westridge. And Westridge has been amazing. I'm so excited to be able to get involved with some of the programs. One of the things that Michael and I like to do is, because we can't have kids, we like to volunteer and help child causes as much as we can. So that the fact that Westridge does stuff with Health Elementary and the Ruth Project and all of that stuff, that's, you know, it's great. It helps us be able to branch out into other things and be able to help more people and children. One of the things that we do is every Friday, we will go this Friday, we go to Feed My Starving Children in Schaumburg, Illinois, and we pack food, and it is awesome. We have a group of people that we go and we pack with, and I have been doing it now for 2 years, and Mike has been doing it for 9, and it's just a great ministry. It's a Christian organization, and my faith journey now is so strong. Like, our life revolves around volunteering and helping others and going to church and being involved in our community. Whereas before, my life was more revolved around video games and stuff like that. I haven't played a video game in 2 years. Because we have branched out from just doing things over the computer and stuff, like, to actually going out and volunteering and meeting new people and doing things and making that one-on-one connection with people. And that's one of the things he and I, we're both extroverted. We can both go up to anybody and talk to them like we've known them for years.
Oh, Bonnie, that is like so beautiful to see that transformation. And I know that there's still transformation in store. You and Michael are about to get married. Can you tell everybody who's going to be walking you down the aisle?
Carlton is going to be walking me down the aisle, and Carrie is going to be doing my Bible readings for me during our ceremony, because I love to hear her read. She just has this most beautiful voice I've ever heard. I could just sit and listen to her read for hours. But yeah, and then I don't even know if my stepdad's going to even come to my wedding. But yeah, it's going to be fun. I can't wait.
Bonnie, I am going to continue to pray for you and Michael's relationship and just the exciting things that are to come for you guys. I'm grateful for your story, how you have shared a lot with us today. And I hope that speaks into people's lives, knowing that, you know, things happen, but it can be redeemed through Christ. And I'm grateful to know you. So thank you so much for sharing today, Bonnie.
Thank you for asking me. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what God has has in store for us and what other things are going to come out of this. I feel like it's only the beginning. I feel like there's so much more that he has in store for us, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
What a story. I hope that whatever you have been through in your life, you can see God's hand and his providence over it all. If you want to be able to reflect some more about what we discussed with Bonnie, here's some takeaway questions for you. Number 1, Bonnie kind of shared an idea about the people in the library, that they all had a label that you could check them out. So if you were to be a person that you could check out at the library, what would your title be? Number 2, I believe Bonnie's story is redeemed. And so what has redemption looked like in your life? When did Jesus become more than just a name for you in your life? Thank you so much for listening. You can always join the Parable Podcast email list. Those that are on the email list recently heard about my roller skating extravaganza. You get to hear great stories like that. It's just a way of sharing some of my funny, messy, real life lessons that I'm learning. Just think of it as a little encouragement in your inbox once a month. Subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, whether on Apple, Spotify, or even we're over on YouTube. Just leave a rating or review. It helps others know about the show. If you have any questions or you want more information about today's episode with Bonnie, you can find that over at daniellezapchenk.com. That's Zapchenk. That'll do it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Remember, your parable, it showcases that God can be anywhere, that we are open to finding him. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.